Welcome to the Random Encounter Show. I'm DeathStalker V. In this table talk, we're going to try to jump directly into our gaming topic. If you're just coming in, the table talk is our weekly episode where I get on here, no script, no teleprompters, no preparation basically, and just talk about whatever's on my mind or cover some topic or whatever. So very impromptu kind of thing. But this week I wanted to talk about my hobby of solo roleplay gaming. Why? Because it's definitely the most requested content we have here at the Random Encounter Show. And where I want to do this episode, and really where I want to start, is go back in time to exactly where I started, how and why I came about solo playing, and how those first sales that would grow into a lifelong hobby of mine gathered and grew outward. And the reason behind that is, maybe I can do a little ranting here for a second. It's not really ranting, but the reason I want to do that is pretty simple. Okay, I don't really watch a lot of solo RPG content on YouTube. And what I have to say here is not to put anybody down. It's not to discourage anyone or any such thing. Okay, I'm just giving you nothing on a specific thing. I'm just giving you what I've seen sort of as an average. But on YouTube and other various social media platforms, I don't watch a lot of content or read a lot of content for solo gaming because to me, it's not at a level that instructs me or inspires me or even motivates me. Yeah, it's, I don't know how to explain it. It's like YouTube and other places, they're echo chambers. That you get people talking about a topic. For some reason, they keep talking about the same things and doing the same things over and over. And you see the other ones start doing it, and the other ones, and the other ones. And I just don't get that. And for solo content in particular, I find that there's plenty of channels out there that have a production value through the roof. Okay, their graphics, their Photoshop work, their video editing, their animation, and everything they do, and they put a ton of time and effort into their videos. But the information can be garbage. It's so odd to me why you put so much time to talk about something that you don't know anything about. And again, we're not singling anybody out here. It's just something that I've noticed quite often. I see solo gamers, a lot of them, they'll talk about a system that's not quite popular for whatever reason. But say anything off 5th edition's Pathfinder class and level stuff, they'll talk about different systems. And a lot of times I'll listen to them talk about a system that I own because I'm way off the beaten path with systems that I use for the most part. But they'll talk about an off the beaten path system that I know and that I love. And just a few minutes in, I realized that these people, this person that's talking or giving out this information, they're giving out some opinions they have based off like a Wikipedia style article or a review or something that they've read somewhere. And you can tell that they've never really got fluent with the rules or maybe even studied the rule book. In some cases, it's even worse than that, but you can especially tell that they've never played the game, that they don't know really what they're talking about. So it's I don't know. For the hobby, it just seems that it's that way for a good average of channels and such out there. And I'm not putting anybody down. Another thing I notice is there's quite a few channels, and they seem to attract a lot of people that do solo gaming, when in fact, if you really watch and pay attention, this is a totally scripted show. That there's no actual gaming to it. That this was written out and they're following a script and they're acting like they're gaming as they go. So I don't know. It just turns me off. It just turns me off. And the reason that I want to start where I'm starting is because I want to give you something different by the time we get to the end result of our solo gaming sort of instructional videos or talking about solo gaming, because I want to give you stuff that's instructional. I want to give you things that are motivating and inspiring to play a much deeper level of solo game than you're probably used to seeing on social media. By deeper, we always got to clarify things nowadays. You know, it's the modern social media. We got to clarify everything we say because somebody's going to get offended or something. What I mean by deeper play is that I see a ton of solo gamers out there. When I survey just solo gaming here and there, they're normally using a class and level system, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, an OSR game, Castles and Crusades. And those are fine systems to use for solo playing. But they use those systems and their games are pretty much the same, that they're trying to replicate the group experience. You know, they've got 4 or 5 characters of the standard sort of group setup. They're going out into the world. They find monsters. They slay monsters. They collect treasure. They go to town. They go back out. And they rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And I'm not saying that I'm above that style of gaming. I quite enjoy doing that. Okay? It's a style of gaming that I do use. But if that's all if that's all the hobby of solo role-playing game really had to offer, it wouldn't keep my interest as much as it does, because, to be honest, that style of gaming gets stale to me very fast. It seems like it's mostly people that are using an RPG rule system to play basically a mechanical board game style game that's, I guess you could I consider it a glorified dungeon crawler. Yeah. I see a lot of people calling stuff solo RPGs that aren't even solo RPGs. Things like 4 Against Darkness, for example. Fabled Lands. Hero Quest. You'll see people calling this stuff solo RPGs. To me, they don't fit the definition of a role-playing game. They are games that have role-playing game style mechanics, but they're not full rule systems that you can use and develop your own game at the table. Go back through my catalog of videos. There's not a ton of them, but stuff like choosing core RPG games for your library. Go back to our solo playlist and a random talk about solo gaming, a new era cometh. You know, you might find some interesting things I've had to say along these lines. But again, when it comes to solo RPGing, I want a full system, okay? And I want to be able to have the tools of that system to experience anything I want to experience that's appropriate for that system. But back to the people that's doing the sort of glorified dungeon crawler using the class and level systems. Another thing that I noticed is almost all of them complain about burnout. That they burn out in their hobby. That's something that's never happened to me per se, not because of my gaming, but they complain about burnout, and you see this over and over. What do? They blame the class and level system they're playing. They go buy another class and level system in a different flavor. Okay, the thing you got to realize about these class and level systems, that they're all pretty much the same game. They just change the flavors of them. But they go buy pretty much the same game of a different flavor, and then they go to playing exactly how they were with the last rule system. Okay, so when I say deeper, I mean something beyond that. Okay, that, and we'll get into that as we get into this further into this talk. But I use a lot of the same tools that other people use. I make a lot of my own tools as well. I have, because I started solo gaming before these tools became available. Okay, if that tells you a little bit about how old DeathStalker V is. But I enjoy picking up the tools for ease of use and such, and to see what other people have come up with. Maybe they're doing something that's much better than what I have developed over time, and I have found stuff like that. I'm not saying that I'm some genius of solo gaming, no. But I use the tools that I use, and I'll incorporate what I want to incorporate. But really, where the difference is the style of play. No matter what rule system that I use and stuff, I approach solo gaming. I don't normally go for the group experience, going out looting and shooting and coming back to town and celebrating, and looting and shooting and coming back to town and celebrating. I tend to focus more on a single character, and I tend to focus on a more actual role-playing that character experience in my solo games. So is that enough said to get kicked off? I don't know. Let me get something to drink here. You got something to drink? Always have something to drink when we do table talk, because these can get long-winded. You're dealing with DeathStalker V here. Anyways, I'm not even sure how I want to film this now that I'm thinking about where we're going. Anyways, let's go back in time to my solo gaming career and where it started. I started playing D&D in the early 90s. Specifically, it would have been 92 or maybe very early 93. I had a group of friends. We had got into Talisman and such. We played at school, before school, during recess, during school, in the after-school program and such. But I've talked about that in other videos and such, gaming story videos and whatnot. Go check them out if you're interested in hearing DeathStalker V talk about his childhood. You'll hear much more about the table talk, I promise you. I've got good stories for when the occasion's appropriate. But I started in the early 90s, and when we started, I had a friend named Jordan, and his brothers were high schoolers, and they played Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. Me and Jordan, we had Talisman and such, and we had got a lot of our friends involved with it at school. And outside of school, our little group, we had Michael, Jordan, Jason, Billy, Shane, and others. We played baseball together. We ran the woods together. We rode bikes together. We had constant sleepovers at each other's houses. And we played a heck of a lot of Talisman and Dungeons and Dragons together. But like I said, Jordan had the older brothers. And Jordan and I decided that we were going to get everyone interested in Dungeons and Dragons, and we were going to learn this game. Now, at my house, Dungeons and Dragons was contraband. Even though this was the early 90s, my parents had never got the memo that the Satanic Panic had ended. Okay? So I had to quietly acquire books. And how I did so was that Jordan's older brothers agreed to sell me D&D books on the school bus and such. Anyways, they were second edition players, and they were also Shadowrun players. Oh my goodness, that game always intrigued me, but I never got into it. But they were second edition players, and what they had done with Jordan and I was they had started pawning off first edition books that they weren't using anymore, selling them to us, and they were probably buying their new second edition campaign settings, because you just had to have 10,000 campaign settings for second edition. But yeah, they pawned them off to us, but really that was a blessing. They thought they were getting over selling us kids some books out of, that were no longer relevant. but they really gave me a blessing in the first edition books. In fact, this was the first book I got my hands on that I purchased from them, and it is the Dungeon Master Guide for first edition. Talk about this in a second. But I ended up getting the Player's Handbook and some other various books through them. But at that time, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, if you've never read it, if you've never looked at it, it's, especially for a kid, it's not so easy to grasp. The organization of things and how the rules are written and some of the things that come into play with really no explanation, really hard to grasp. But we read the books, we tried to understand them. What we did understand, we absolutely loved. But in this, we got Michael and Kyle, Vampire Kyle. He was a member of our group. There was two Kyles. There was Hell Angel's Birthday Party Kyle and Vampire Kyle. Vampire Kyle. We got these guys. They were interested in playing D&D as well. And what they did is they went out and they actually came to school with some basic D&D sets. Kyle, he came to school with a home set. I still remember the blue cover with the dragon and stuff on it. I know that Michael and Shane both had red box sets. And I don't think they were that old. I think they still publish red box set. I don't know when they quit publishing the basic red box sets. Really the BECMI sets, but it was the basic red box that was the most popular for people. But we sat down with the red box sets. And Michael and Kyle, they studied them. And me and Jordan, we studied AD&D and such. But the games were very similar. But basic D&D, especially not the Holmes edition, well, I don't know, it wasn't that bad. But the red box set, the Metzger sets, they were much easier to understand, way better organized, and easy for us to get into. And that was the rules that we started using. Okay, me and Jordan still had a plan that we were going to convert the group over to AD&D at some point. That never happened, but we played basic D&D. Every chance we got. Okay, me and that group, we played D&D from 2nd grade to the middle of 4th grade. My parents got divorced and we moved back to my grandparents' farm. But we played for between 2nd and 4th grade. We had to have put hundreds of hours into playing D&D. And as we played D&D, it was fun meeting up wherever we could meet up to play when we had a chance to play. But I would always have D&D on my mind. I was obsessed with fantasy in general. Anything that had to do with wizards and knights and swords and maces and shields and castles and dragons. I just ate it up. You know, movies, books, anything I could put my hands on. But D&D was the most intriguing to me because it's the closest thing I think you can get to actually existing in one of those worlds and experiencing it firsthand, if you actually role play, that is. But it was always on my mind, and I remember always wondering, you know, like, what's my character doing? And I would think that about all types of characters, like, what were their home lives like? Like, when they weren't out adventuring, you know, fighting trolls in some cave somewhere or whatever. What was their home life, their mundane life like? It must be pretty extraordinary as well for them to be able to go out and do these things. And I don't know, maybe I was weird, but I always thought about that kind of stuff. And I thought about NPCs that we met along the way, that they were very interesting characters. I wonder what they were doing. So I would come up in my mind, you know, maybe adventures they were having outside of our game and such. Okay, and I wanted to talk about that because that really influenced my solo gaming coming up. But we get to 1994. Okay, I want to get here. The summer of 1994, right as we began school, I had a friend. He was in high school and he had a car, and he would come over and hang out at my house once or twice a week, and we would play Super Nintendo together. Now, he had a ton of systems. He had a 3DO at one point. Oh my God. That's stories about him later. His name's Lonnie. Okay, he lived down the road. I was sort of like his little sidekick that was still in elementary school, but he was a cool guy, and we got along, and yeah, you know, he come over to game and such. Now, he also, for whatever reason, at the high school where I lived, second edition D&D was popular with the high schoolers, but Shadowrun was very popular amongst the role-play gamers in school then. And this was the early 90s, so role-playing games were still pretty much at their height. They started declining around 94, 95 as best that I remember. But he had D&D and such as well. Where we lived, there was absolutely no resources for buying anything D&D. I mean, there was literally like 2 gas stations, a few churches, a very small supermarket, an elementary/middle school, and a high school. Well, actually, it was a high school and middle school together, not the elementary school, my bad. And some ball fields and such. But there's really nothing there. But about 45 minutes to an hour away, in sort of the main town of the county, there was Quest Comics and Games. They're still there to this day as far as I know. They've moved location like 18 times within the town. But they were there in the early 90s. And any chance I got that I could convince an adult that I was with or whatever to take me to Quest, even if it was just to look around, I absolutely loved it. But anyways, back to where we're at in 1994. I had a birthday, and I had some cash money. And Lonnie told me he was going to Quest, and he would take me with him if I wanted to go. I begged my parents to go. But the answer was no. They would never let me ride with Lonnie. Okay, they were being smart parents, okay? But Lonnie was cool. Lonnie was cool. He wasn't anything weird. Well, he was a little bit weird, but not weird in any kind of bad ways. More of a goth kid weird. But anyways, I asked Lonnie if he would pick something up I had seen in there that it had came out earlier that year. I had seen it, and I knew that Quest Comics had several copies of it. And it was this box set. Yeah, the classic Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I had no idea what classic D&D was. It didn't say basic, it didn't say original, it didn't say anything. It's the classic D&D. But what it did say was that it was a full game. Inside it had a full rule book, including your monsters and your GM advice and all this kind of stuff. It came with a complete set of adventure dice. At the time, I had a piecemeal set. I think I was borrowing a D20. No, I had a D20. There was one of the die I was borrowing. I can't remember what it was. Some of my piecemeal set. Here's 2 D6 from that set. Look how big they are. But yeah, it's a piecemeal set that, you know, and there's the, look at us. I told you this is the Table Talks random. And there's an old school D4 from my piecemeal set. But it had a full set of dice. Even in the 90s, if you lived rurally like I did, a full set of dice was sort of a rarity unless you had a connection in getting somewhere as a kid. But it came with miniatures in it, everything. I had looked at this box and I didn't really know what it was, but I knew I wanted to have it. And one thing that it made known was it was good for beginners. Yeah? So I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what it was. Turns out it was a reissue of the basic game of Dungeons and Dragons. And probably the best form that it came in, to be honest. It's a fantastic book. Here's the rule book here. It made learning D&D, the basic system, very, very easy. In fact, it contained a choose-your-own-adventure style game inside, or adventure, that taught you the game as you played. But like I said, it came with a full monster manual stuff. We'll talk about this box set at another time, because to me, I still think it's the greatest box set that I've ever bought. Even as an adult, I have lots of box sets over here of games from various ages. But yeah, it's one of the greatest. It came with a ton of stuff. But what this did was enable me to more fully study the rule set that we had been using. And this was a little bit more full than even the red box set, which most people had. But I got to study it and understand it even more. It has some adventure modules and posters and stuff in it. And for whatever reason, something started clicking with me. And I think it was because I had been reading this book religiously. When I say religiously, I mean religiously. The Dungeon Master Guide, to me, is still probably the most important game book as far as contributions to the hobby of role-playing itself, but also solo role-playing, even though sort of not overtly, but I consider it probably the greatest book for contributions to the hobby of all time. The book is packed full of fantastic material and advice on using game mechanics and building campaign worlds and adventures and how to handle different situations and different things. And it was Gary Gygax packed this thing. It's jam-packed. So anyways, I studied this thing. I studied it every night. And like I said, getting this, using it with my group and stuff, and reading this book all the time, finally solo gaming, the cells in my brain sort of merged together for solo gaming. I want to talk about this for just a minute. This book is filled with all kind of tables and such. That's important to know. I'm flipping through here through the appendices, probably the most famous parts of the Dungeon Master Guide for people nowadays. Let's just flip here, and hopefully you can get a good view of this. I think most people coming to here watching solo content are gonna know what a dungeon generator and tables are, random encounter tables and such. So I don't feel like I need to go over that. If I do, I will. But yeah, maybe if I do sort of a more instructional video, we'll talk about tables. We will talk about tables, because I'll talk about building your own tables at some point. But anyways, at the end of Appendix A, which is this massive dungeon crawling, or not dungeon crawling, but dungeon generation system of tables, one of the best ever made. I mean, I've got quite a few that I really enjoy. There might be one or two that's actually better than this one, but it's not by much. But I would say this is on par with the best. Think about that. What is it? Over 40 years old, and it's still one of the best dungeon generators. But I got to reading over here, and I'm sure this will be hard to get on camera, even if I got behind the camera. But right here, what do we got? We got a small few paragraphs on random dungeon generation for solo play. A few paragraphs of advice for using this dungeon generator here to play like a dungeon crawler for solo play. And I was familiar with it, I read that, and I finally had the rule set that I understood and could fully utilize. I did exactly that. I began to do dungeon crawling with some characters. Okay? And that went on for a while. But again, I asked myself, if you can use the random dungeon generator to run, for solo play, why can't I use something like the random wilderness terrain generator? Why can't I use stuff like the random encounters for that wilderness? Why can't I run the city encounter stuff? Why couldn't I run those things outside of a dungeon? And that's what I began to play around with. And yeah, before long, I was drawing up rudimentary maps. You know, I didn't have hex paper, even square paper. I was using construction paper, whatever I had at hand. But I would draw up these maps and explore them around. Nothing too technical. Come on, I was a kid. But exploring these things around, and basically it was just a big dungeon crawler on the outside, and you would find inside locations to go in. So it wasn't as good as group play or actual role playing. There was no role playing involved. I would try to force role playing into it. You know, like I would meet an NPC. You would just get a one-line description of an NPC basically. You know, it might say a harlot or a thief. Some of those things I had to look up in the dictionary. Okay? But it was, I would just sort of force role play, and what I would do is just imagine what that character must be like, and sort of give them a personality and talk to them and stuff, but nothing very deep at this point. Again, it was just basically a large dungeon crawler. One of the neat things I remember specifically from this book was it had a monster reaction table in it. Not an NPC reaction, but monsters. If you came across monsters in a dungeon, how did they react to you meeting them? Okay, so that was one way that sort of gave it a little flavor, a little personality, a little bit. But exploring around and rolling stuff up, I developed a sandbox style background to my game. And I really enjoyed that. But as these cells continue to combine, I said, originally we talked about I wanted to know what my character or these NPCs and stuff, what was really their story. Because even playing in a group, and I'm not saying this from a selfish perspective, but I always wondered what it would be like to play these characters like every day, day-to-day kind of thing, no matter what they're doing, and get to know their families and their friends and their stories and things. And I said, well, why can't I do this with my normal character that I use for the group gaming? And I don't know why, but I never wanted to tell my group that I was doing anything at home. You know, working at gaming or anything at home. Because for some reason to me it felt like cheating on them. I don't know. I don't know what I was doing with that. But I really didn't want them to find out. So anytime that we slept over at my house or anything, I would hide those maps and such before they got there because I didn't want them to know that I was gaming without them. Is that weird or what? I don't know. We were so tight-knit. But that's what I was doing. But again, with the character, I tried to give my character a lot of personality, but it was very hard to give NPCs and such personality. And there was no motivations in the world. There were no events. There was no stories and such. What I would do was I would take a story. Maybe I would just imagine my character and imagine a story to send him through. And it would not be sandbox style. You know, I would imagine, well, there's a cave over here and it's got this treasure in it and this bad guy has it. Now, I would probably roll up the cave using the generator step by step as I proceeded through it in a procedural sandbox manner. But as far as story design and stuff went, and having triggers and story hooks and such, I just didn't have those concepts in my game just yet. But again, I had a lot of fun playing in that style. Now let's talk about me moving away from my group, okay? I moved back to my family farm. My mom got a little place on the north side of the farm in the woods. I was happy, okay? My grandparents were my best friends for most of my life. They're passed away now, but they were my best friends from birth, basically. They did a lot of contributions in raising me and helping me and such. So I was not unhappy to move there. But in moving there, because it was so far away, hour and a half or so from where I was living and where my group and friends were located, we went over Christmas break from school. I didn't have the friends. I didn't have the places. I didn't have all this stuff. I didn't know anyone. And the fact was that where we lived on the farm, this was much more rural than even where I came from. Okay, so imagine that. So going to school and meeting the kids there and stuff, most of them had never heard of Dungeons and Dragons or anything. And so I think that was the cataclysm to what really started pushing me further into solo gaming, because I just fell in love more and more with Dungeons and Dragons and such, and RPGs in total. And one good thing happened was on the weekends, my grandfather, he retired from GMC, General Motors Company. He had this large farm there, but he stayed busy. He was the kind of person that from when he woke up like at 4 in the morning and went to bed at 10 at night, he had a full schedule. He did not slow down for anything. So he always had to have something to do. But on the weekends, he would go to these postal auctions and buy containers or whatever of, he was looking specifically for linens. Now, he got all kind of crazy stuff. I found all kind of crazy stuff in them. I got my first Game Boy out of them. But he would do this, and I had 2 cousins that would help him, older cousins, Eric and Drew. They were brothers. And Drew was, I think he is 3 years older than me, but I think Eric's more like 12 to 13 years older than me. But anyways, they helped my grandfather, but Eric had gone off and was doing something else. So my grandfather press ganged me into joining him and Drew at the flea market. And hey, I was going to get to be around who I called my pawpaw, or my grandfather. And I didn't complain about that, and he paid for it. And what we did is we went to we had to get up like at 2 in the morning, but we would go to these flea markets all around Alabama and Georgia and such, southeastern United States. We would set up, and basically we were there to help set the booths up, make sure nobody was stealing stuff, and to watch things if my grandfather had to go use the restroom or something. But I quickly learned that from my cousin Drew that, hey, we had cash money we were earning, during downtimes or whatever. He and we could go out and explore the flea market and maybe buy some stuff. And he looked for old video games and I looked for old video games, but I was more on the hunt for role-playing games and board games and such as well. And we had one in particular flea market in northwest Georgia that we would go to more often than not. And there was a guy there who sold books. He would have boxes of books just all over the ground, books on tables and stuff. And he was a good source of finding old role-playing game stuff for cheap. We're talking modules and stuff, $1 each and whatnot. This was in the 90s, mid-90s by this point. Late 90s as well. But you could pick that stuff up cheap. I found so many great things there. Most of them I've lost now. I think back to all the adventure modules and stuff I had found for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Tomb of Horrors, I should say. Ravenloft, Temple of Elemental Evil, and Dragon Mountain for 2nd edition. Even though I never played 2nd edition, you could use the material quite easily. But there were so many good modules and stuff I no longer have. I've been thinking about those. Maybe we'll have to go get them. And I don't want the reprints from Wizards of the Coast. No thanks. I don't want sanitized things. Give me the real deal, okay? Anyways, we went to the flea market. And the next thing I found that really helped me out with my solo gaming was this right here, and I've never seen anybody talk about this on YouTube. There probably is somebody talking about it, but I've never seen it. It's the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Design Kit. Okay? This thing was fantastic, a fantastic find for me. Book 1. It's a 3-book thing here. And this is my original one, by the way. This is one thing that did survive, if you notice the taped up spines and the staple rust and such condition. But book 1, here we go, Adventure Design. What this book did, not a huge book, but what it did was it broke down how to create adventures for your role-playing games. How to create events, how to create triggers, how to create villains, how to create story hooks, how to give them to NPCs and such. And so it was a fascinating read, and I learned a ton about story design or adventure design straight from this module. I learned much more about story design from here than I ever did from an English class. Okay? But that was very good because it got my mind thinking about how to better put together stories and such. Book 2 was a book of forms here. I never used this, even though it sort of outlined the adventure design and how to put all these wonderful ideas and such down. I never really used that. But book 3, the Adventure Cookbook, right here. This set off my solo gaming to where we started getting outside of just glorified loot and shoot dungeon crawling with no true stories or anything being generated by our sandbox game. But this book right here, it contained various tables. Okay? Maybe the camera will focus, like such as right here. Motivations, NPC motivations. You were supposed to use them to get ideas for designing the adventure. But because I realized that I could use these tables like out of the Dungeon Master Guide and out of any rule book that I picked up or any magazine, role-playing game magazines, I bought those as well. I got a lot of great tools from those. But I realized that anytime you had some kind of table where there was a random element to it, more than likely that was going to be useful for your sandbox style. Now, the most of the time you would come across what? Random encounter tables. And that was the least useful thing. We'll get into that. But this one had motivations for NPCs. It had sort of theme like action, adventure, comedy, espionage, horror, mystery, if you wanted to roll up a theme of your adventure. But it's just tables after tables. Here's a quest table. Dying delivery, legends and rumors, mistaken identity, mystery woman, old enemy, old friend. And they would give you these tables, but they would also give you at least a paragraph giving you story ideas for how to use that result in your game. Again, made it fantastic for sandbox style games. I highly recommend you check this out. There's location tables. Let's see what we got here. We got NPC tables, where it gives you sort of some personalities of NPCs, like an arrogant snob, a childhood friend with a dark secret, an absent-minded expert. Hey, I might have something common there. Talkative barkeep, so it was this started adding. All of a sudden my NPCs, if I use these tools here, all of a sudden they had more personality, but they were also having motivations and purposes and even story hooks and things that they could offer my characters through my sandbox gaming. So that was a huge step for me. More sales had gathered into the cluster that would form the body of my hobby. Absolutely a blast though. But this one right here combined with the Dungeon Master Guide. And the Dungeon Master Guide, we're not talking about all the tables here. There's tables for everything in here, almost. You won't find story tables. You won't find a lot of personality tables for NPCs and stuff. I can't remember if there's a motivation table for NPCs. I don't think there is. But there's like a table for determining how many parasites you catch from different places and what type. I mean, it's got some tables in it. But mostly for, group play. But like I said, we can use that. Anyways, from that seller at the flea market there, I wanted to talk about 2 more games that I purchased and how they contributed to adding more sales to my solo gaming. The first game here. This was the second game I owned that was not a class and level D&D system. Or just D&D itself of whatever edition. It's a little known game that there's not a whole lot of information out here. But when I tell you it is a killer game for what it is, it's no lie. But it's Swordbearer from Heritage Games. Now, this is not the exact box set that I had. I actually bought this for myself for Christmas because I found it for like $35 shipped. But this is the first edition box set that I had at the time. And there was nothing in this box set except 3 or 4 pamphlet-style books that laid out the system of Swordbearer. And I don't really remember essentially what drew me to this box set because it's pretty plain affair. I think at the time that the motivation was that somehow this looked like it would be more set up like Conan the Barbarian, which I was a big fan of at the time. If I could get my hands on the comics, if I could get my hands on the short stories and novels by the different authors and such. We'll talk about Conan one day and I'll share some of my favorite stories. But it had more of sort of like a Conan look to it, I think. Anyways, this helped big time. Okay, that it wasn't necessarily a super easy game to learn, but it wasn't a hard game to learn. It's actually probably easier to learn than first edition Dungeons and Dragons. But it was not a class and level system. It's actually something more akin to RuneQuest or Rollmaster, though nowhere near either one of those games. But it was on a D100 system, percentile system, and it was an attribute/skill mechanic game. Okay? I got fascinated with this game and started messing around with it as much as I could because you could really build better characters using this, and you could build characters that were more fun to play than the class and level system style characters because there was more versatility in character creation. There was more freedom. Okay, you're locked in on a class and level system to these character types, or these character classes, I should say. And class and level systems aren't built for a single character to be very good by themselves. No, the group experience and a balanced group is the motivation behind the rule set of class and level systems. So this is where I started figuring out with class and level systems that, you know what? These more open-ended systems that were attribute-based or skill-based, there were more paperwork and a lot more involved normally. But in the end, they led to a little deeper gameplay, especially this one because it had some, it nowhere near Rollmaster or anything, but it had some critical hits and failures and such in it. But the one thing out of this whole set that stuck with me the most is out of the Game Master Guide. And we're going to review Swordbearer. I really want to review it and get some information out there about this wonderful game. I know Arnold Hendrick, who's behind Swordbearer first and second edition, I know he's passed away. So I think it would be good to get some information out there because this is a sleeper game. It's a heartbreaker game, but it's a game that a lot of people don't know about, but it's actually quite good. But what I wanted to get to was in the Game Master Advice section. Here they gave us a NPC reaction table. Not a monster reaction table, but a full-fledged social interaction table dealing with NPCs. And I found it interesting because it had modifiers that you would use to determine where this NPC initially began with you. Was it hostile? Was it sort of nonchalant? Was it worshiping you, or was it friendly? Whatever. It gave you modifiers to sort of figure up on the scale where you're beginning with this NPC. And as you interacted with the NPCs, whether you use skills or such, you would roll on this chart, and it was just a 2d6 roll. But as the NPC reacted to you, say you rolled a 6, or you after modifiers you had a 6. It says the NPC is restrained and cautious, provides no information but not impolite. All other skills in this social interaction are at -25. Interaction may be competitive still. So it gave you more than just skill modifiers and stuff. It gave you detailed information of what was going on. So when you had your sandbox style and you had this adventure design, and you had something, a motivation behind the NPC and a little bit of a personality, now all of a sudden you could start having basically conversations with some mechanics behind them in a sandbox style. So that really started to change the game for me. And not long after purchasing Swordbearer, my next one was Dragon Quest 2nd Edition from SPI. And I'm crazy about this game. I'm absolutely crazy about Dragon Quest. I don't get it out so often anymore. But it's a fantastic system. Another D100 percentile system that's somewhere around. It's more RuneQuest than it is Rollmaster. But it's really sort of straddles the line between RuneQuest and First Edition AD&D, if I'm honest. But it also came with reaction tables, a lot more critical hit, critical failure style tables and such. And it added more and more to my game, but it was a much more complete and a much more detailed game than Swordbearer is. So I was able to use my system to add a lot more detail into my gaming as well. And when I bought this system, this box set, it had come with a map of what was the Alusia, I think it was. A hex map of Alusia, huge, massive hex map that had a small, like, pamphlet book that had very small entries on places on the map and just sort of gave you just a very broad general idea of the place. But the not solo adventures, but the adventure modules for Dragon Quest. One of my favorite of all time is in Dragon Quest 2nd Edition, the Enchanted Wood. It's a very sandboxy style, huge forest, basically a campaign setting. But they presented things almost directly in a sandbox style. They had rumor tables, they had NPC tables and stuff. So as characters went around in these woods, you never know how they were going to spin the adventure module or what order things would be in and such. And so that was another fantastic step along the way. And using the various tools I had here, I learned that I could use pretty much anything as a tool. For example, I wanted to have a way to name NPCs. What did I do? For those who are old enough to remember phone books or the yellow pages, I used to just flip randomly to a page in there and scroll down till I found a name I liked for whatever NPC I was looking for and such. But everything became a tool. If I saw elements of books or movies and things I liked, I would drop them into my sandbox style game. Because by this point, I had learned to build my own tables. Now, there's a lot of tables I use straight out of books, like the NPC reaction table, the dungeon generator and wilderness generator and stuff like that. But when it came to random encounters, for example, I figured out very quickly that I needed to scale those encounters to the game I was playing, the level character or characters I was playing, limit the number of them, but also choose encounters that made sense in the environment. Not just in a broad sense, but specifically whatever campaign world I was playing or whatever, things that made sense to be there. I would also have places for If you rolled something, an event triggered. You know, if you were in a city, I had a table of city events. If you were out in the wilderness, it was wilderness events. It could have been anything from a storm to a caravan to meeting a noble to a thief tries to rob you. Whatever the case was, I had tables and I built tables on the go for the games that I played. And the very last thing that really took my solo gaming more toward a full level of solo gaming at this point, I did a video on it. My common sense are simple D100 Oracle. How did that come about? It came about while I was playing Dragon Quest and using the Dungeon Master's Guide. Okay? In the Dungeon Master Guide, I had seen it and I had used several tables here, and it hadn't clicked with me just before. But there's tables in here that have percentage rolls. And it's basically what's the chance of this happening? Yeah? And I had used that. Again, we had, there's like here. Chances for contracting diseases and parasites and such. You know, how many of y'all included this stuff in your game? But there's various tables in the DMG here that have chances of certain things happening to your characters based on where they're at. And I remember I was playing Dragon Quest, which is a D100 percentile systems. So using charts and such that were based on percentile tools and also running a percentile based system, I think it was quite natural. But at one point in the game, I remember I had asked basically that an event triggered off, but I wanted to know, did it happen where I was, or did it happen just in a general sense somewhere in the world? And I said to myself, I wonder what the chances are. You know, did it happen near me? And I sit there and I said, well, I'm out here in the wilderness or whatever, and this event, I can't remember what the event was. I'm not perfect, guys. But I said the event seems like it would happen more in a city somewhere. I do remember parts. Anyways, I said it's only a 20% chance this thing happens here, where I'm at. I rolled the dice, it didn't happen where I was at. And I said, well, what city did it happen in? There was a few cities on the map. So I rolled on each city until we finally got a roll that met the percentage or was over it. And we said it was in that city. And all of a sudden, more sales joined into this body of solo hobby, RPGing. And it clicked in my brain at that point that I could use this percentile roll for everything. You know, I could say, what's the chance there's monsters in this room? I could say, what's the chance that this town has a blacksmith? I could say, what's the chance that my character could find this specific herb? The list goes on. And it evolved from those simple origins. And the rest of my solo gaming evolved from these simple origins. But for the most part in this video, I just wanted to talk about basically how I started at a time when there was nothing really available for solo gaming, at least not to me. I didn't have a clue about an oracle, okay? I didn't even know I had an oracle when I had an oracle. I'd never heard an oracle called an oracle. I became aware of oracle somewhere around like 2017 or something. I mean, it was, no, a little bit earlier than that. When Scarlet Heroes first took off and people were really pushing Scarlet Heroes, I loved Scarlet Heroes. Not the game itself and the setting, but I loved the solo tools in it. But yeah, that's when I became aware that, oh, this is an oracle. You know, and I love their oracle, and I use it a lot. But I had no idea such oracles or anything. I'd never read that in an RPG magazine. The stuff that was about solo playing was basically dungeon generators and such. And then the most useful tools I found were not mentioned whatsoever about solo gaming. And that's the thing I wanted to say is that pull your tools from everywhere you can. Your imagination is the best tool you will ever have for solo gaming. Okay? A lot of times, I don't even roll for things. I just quiet my mind and I sort of see ideas bubble up. And when one really strikes home, I hit it and I grab that idea and I bring it to the table as quickly as possible and stop thinking about it and then set up my tools for following this idea. Maybe I'll set up a solo RPG meditation guide. Come on. I don't know. But yeah, I just wanted to explain it that, hey, the point of this, pull your tools from anywhere you can find them. It doesn't have to have solo RPG written on it somewhere. Okay? We'll get more into the tools I use and have used. But the best tools I've ever used were not written for solo RPGs. Anything that's made for game masters, dungeon masters, referees, etc., no matter when or where it was written and for what, even for wargaming, normally you're going to probably find some useful information and probably going to find some useful tools for your solo hobby, depending on what you're looking for. The next thing is with the rudimentary tools that are presented in the Dungeon Master Guide, for example. Look at the structure of those tools and build your own tables and stuff using the structure. Now, you can get better structures for sure. The whole point here is saying, hey, you don't be happy with what you're given. Improve it and stylize it and flavor it directly to the game you're playing at the time. And what else do we want to talk about? I don't know. I'm going to save Walmart stories probably for next week. Anyways, guys, like I said, I don't know if this might have been motivational or inspirational, but hopefully it sort of gives you an idea of how I got started. And because when I get to where I want to be with the solo content on this channel, I want to have plenty of resources because I hope that we can reach a much deeper level than what's the normal average around YouTube. I hope to have a lot of resources there that you can go back, that people coming in and saying, wait a second, what is he doing and how is he doing that? I hope to have those resources there and plenty of them that are instructional. Okay, and they can go back and say, well, that makes sense now. I see how he took this thing and it got to where he's at now on his table. Okay? But anyways, the biggest thing I can do with this channel is inspire and motivate people to explore their imaginations and have fun. Yeah? That's what we're all about. What time is it? I don't know. How long have we been on here? Time to go. It's about 3 a.m. on Friday night. I filmed these on Friday night. It's going to be Saturday afternoon where you're at, probably, or night, depending on where you are in the world. So, really, we're doing a little bit of time traveling, aren't we? I'm talking in the past, and you're watching it in the future. And right now, it's the present. I don't know, guys. I'm DeathStalker 5. This has been Table Talk. Those dice aren't going to roll themselves, so get on out there and get after it.
Hey, this is DeathStalker 5. I wanted to thank you for watching the Random Encounters show. If you love tabletop gaming, solo RPGing, or classic video games, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. If you want more of the show, head over to our channel's About page. There you will find our Facebook and Facebook group pages where you can join in on the fun. Want to help support the show? Make sure to use our affiliate and sponsor links next time you're shopping for your favorite gaming products. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time when we roll for Random Encounter.